A tall rider named Hackberry said, "We crossed the railroad tracks late yesterday. I figure we're about halfway between Grafton and Swallow Fork. There's a big draw runs through a ways this side of Swallow Fork. With the wet spring they had here, there ought to be good grass in it and plenty of water. We could camp there as long as we wanted. Ain't anybody apt to see us except maybe a stray cowpuncher or two." Denzil said, "You don't reckon they've heard about that bank job?" "That was a long ways off. Last time I was in Swallow Fork, you didn't have no telegraph or nothing. Who'd be looking for us down here?" "Nobody, I reckon, and I could sure use me a good rest." The younger fox pushed his horse up close to Hackberry's. "What kind of town is this Swallow Fork? Chance a man could find himself a little entertainment?" Hackberry said, "The kind you're looking for?" He shook his head. "Last time I was there, it was just a dull-looking little cow town. You could get yourself something to drink, maybe a quiet game of cards, low limit. Nothing fancy. And no wheelie-go girls." Buster was plainly disappointed. "Ain't that a shame?" Then his face brightened again. "I wonder if they've got a bank." A loud clatter was going on at the shack's old cast-iron cook stove. "If you don't quit polishing that tin star and go chop some firewood, there won't be any breakfast." Sitting on the edge of his cot, Jim-Bob McClain turned about with a youthfully sheepish grin and waved a hand at the young man who had spoken. "Hold your horses, Dan. I'll get to it directly." He pinned the deputy badge on his left shirt pocket, catching the Bull Durham sack with the pin the first time he tried. He reached down and pulled on his long-eared, high-heeled boots. He already had his hat on. It was the first thing he looked for when he got up of a morning. An old cowboy habit he had developed sleeping on the ground in wintertime, dressing from the head downward as he worked up out of the warm blankets. Dan Singleton stood at the black stove, poking remnant wood chips in on top of the reluctant flame he coaxed out of dry kindling. Ashes filtered out around the sprung door and fell at his feet. "Thought this was your week to chop the wood," Dan prodded Jim-Bob good-naturedly. "Or do I have to call out the law? I meant to do it last night, but with the dance down at Southern's barn and all, I flat forgot." "Then you better get at it, or it's going to be a long, hungry day." Jim-Bob walked out of the little framed shack and paused to enjoy the clean freshness of the early morning. This was the summertime's best hour in the West Texas range country, just at sunup. The cool air of a brand-new day braced a man and gave him vigor, made him imagine he could ride horseback 100 miles without his shoulders ever sagging. It gave him all manner of grand ambition, notions the noonday heat would later bake out of him. Along the wagon road, just hollering distance away, lay the beginnings of the town of Swallow Fork. A scattering of frame and adobe houses first, thickening up and bunching closer together the nearer they lay to the rock courthouse and jail, and the dozen or so business buildings that made up the core. It sprawled out haphazardly, like a big remuda of horses loose-herded across half of a valley. Jim-Bob listened. About all he could hear was a couple of roosters crowing the sun up, and a shut-in milk-pen calf bawling for its mammy. Quiet town most of the time. Sleepy livestock town, drawing its livelihood from the good rolling rangeland that lay about it, from the tall bunch grasses that made the hillsides wave green in the gentle south breeze, from the valley's short, tough, curly mesquite buffalo grass, from the leggy, longhorn cattle that roamed and grazed there, and from the scattering bands of free-ranging sheep that were edging in on the cattleman's domain, winning him over by pressure of economics, if not from liking for the animal. Quiet town it was, but one with ambitions, and one with a future. Jim-Bob's town. Like the town, he had ambitions. He could only hope he had a future, too. He stood with hands shoved deep in his pockets, jingling the coins he carried there. Pay from his first month as a deputy sheriff of Coolridge County. He had hoped and worked and planned for a long time to pin that badge on his shirt. Now he had it. "Jim-Bob!" Dan Singleton's impatient voice insisted through the open door. "How about that wood?" "Comin'." A big red dog...